As I speak, as I give this message, the public speaking part of it is not the difficult piece for me. I've been blessed. I've had a number of jobs, especially early in my life, where I did a lot of public speaking. So this part of it, the giving the message, doesn't stress me. I don't lose sleep over it. It's fairly comfortable. It's kind of a nice space for me. But what really weighs on me is the words, the message. I'm always fearful, and I always stress that I'm going to say something incorrectly, or I'm going to try to explain a concept, and someone will take that message in a direction that I didn't intend, or I misspoke, and they take it one way, and they make a spiritual decision that leads them to a place that they shouldn't be. The other part of it that really kind of weighs on me is that when I'm up here giving the message, that you will see me as something that I am not. I think there's a tendency at times to assume because I'm up here that I sin less, or that I'm more spiritual, or I have a better relationship with God, and I'm here to tell you right up front that is the furthest thing from the truth. I am a sinner. I get angry at times. My wife and kids will tell you that at times I can be overbearing. I can push and drive, and I have a tendency not to let things go. I can hold a grudge, and there are times and situations that I respond in a way that really isn't, becoming of a Christian, so to speak. But God has really poured out His grace on me over the last couple of years, and has really given me a heart and a desire. And it's a continuous walk. And I'm better than I was 5 years ago, but man, that's a long road ahead of you. So just bear with me, and please don't view me as anything more than just another person. And one of the great things about giving a message is that you kind of come up with this idea or this concept, and it gets laid on your heart. And at some point, God undoubtedly smacks you and says, this message isn't for anyone else but you. And that really happened a couple of weeks ago. I left work early on a Friday. We had some family coming in town. It was the first time in several years that my brothers and I had been together. And it'll probably be the last time for several more years, because one of my brothers is being deployed to South Korea. And I was rushing home because I got to mow the lawn. I wanted to get the weed whacking done. There's just a whole bunch of things that needed to be done around the house. And when I walked in the door, my wife says to me, I got great news, which is like code for whatever she's about to tell me is not good news. We have a water leak. So I go in, and right inside our door, right inside the closet, you can see the water running, just spraying out, but it's like up and in, and it's between the first floor and the second floor, and it sits between the kitchen and the bathroom, and well, it's just not easy to get to. So we're kind of having this discussion about whether, do we cut a hole in the ceiling in the bathroom, or do we cut a hole in the kitchen? But if you do that in the kitchen, then you have to tear the cabinets down, and then we'd have to put the cabinets back up. And needless to say, that discussion escalated into a debate, and it further escalated into, well, let's just say tensions were rising in the Thomas household that day. And first service, I told this, and I'm going to tell this in this service, but I won the argument. We didn't tear out the cabinets. We just cut a hole in our bathroom, and we were able to get up there, and we were able to see that it was in an elbow, it was leaking. So just run to Home Depot and get the parts. And there's a couple of people in here that know what I do Monday through Friday, so this story is really going to scare them, and they're really going to question my current job. It took me 4 trips to Home Depot to get this repaired. And as I'm leaving Home Depot for the 4th time, and it's hot and I'm sweaty, and I know I'm behind because now I'm going to be mowing the lawn and by one of those headlight lamps, and the weed whacking needs to be done. As I'm pulling out that access road between Walmart and Home Depot and Painted Post, I see this gentleman ahead of us on the side of the road, and He's got he's got a white t-shirt on, and this is a brand new, brilliant white t-shirt. It has that iridescent look to it that the first time you put it on, it instantly goes away, or the first time you put it through the washer, it's just gone and it never looks that white again. He's got on what look to be brand new Nike sneakers. He's got sunglasses, a hat, and he's holding a sign. And as I get closer, I can see it's a whiteboard that he's holding, and on the whiteboard it says, "Will work for food." So my first thought wasn't, hey, I have a cup holder full of change that I can give to this gentleman. It wasn't, hey, on my third trip to Home Depot, I stopped at the Dandy and I got 2 Mountain Dews because they're 2 for $3.33, and that's a deal, so you have to get 2 because they're only $3.33, right? It wasn't that. It wasn't, hey, maybe he's a plumber, and for a pizza, he'll fix the water leak. Or maybe he's a landscaper, and I'll get a professional, the grass gets mowed and weed whacked. No, it wasn't that. It was, dude, you're holding a whiteboard, panhandling, at least look the part, right? You're just like, hey, come on, he's got the brand new clothes on, he's got a whiteboard. I have never in all of my life seen anyone panhandling with a whiteboard. Like a crumpled up piece of paper or like the ripped off piece of a cardboard box, I get that. Like, epic fail, right? There's not a whole lot in that story that's really screams Christian values. It shouldn't matter, what he's wearing, or if someone's in need, we should just meet that need. So we're going to continue the series, I Want to Be Like, and my I Want to Be Like is the Good Samaritan. And if you turn in your Bibles to Luke chapter 10, verse 25, we're going to spend some time in there. But first, as I was preparing for this message, I came across this concept that Christ really tells 2 types of parables. The first parable is about the convicted receiving grace. And those are like the real heartwarming stories. Those are the ones that we can really identify with, that we can see ourselves as the convicted, and we can see God's grace being poured out. And it just makes us feel good. It gives us hope, and we enjoy those messages. But the second parable is convicting us to share grace. And those messages are considerably more tough. It forces us to look inward. It forces us to look at our heart, to look at our desires and how we treat the people around us, and really examine who we are and how we're sharing grace. And the story of the Good Samaritan is one of those stories. So we're going to pick it up in verse 25 in chapter 10. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" So a little bit of context. At this point, the priests and the religious leaders have seen what Jesus is doing, and they really don't like the message that he's sharing. And they're looking for a way to trip him up. So I am picturing these guys like in a room, and there's this one religious lawyer in the back that's like, hey, I got the perfect question. I'm going to trip this Jesus guy up on this question. So in verse 26, it says, Jesus responds, "What is written in the law?" He replied, "How do you read it?" So like any good pastor, Jesus responds to any question with a question. He's like, I know that you know the answer. You've studied the law, you're versed in the law, I know it, so why don't you explain to me what you have to do? So the religious lawyer replies in verse 27, he answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all of your mind, and love your neighbors as yourself." Perfect textbook answer. The religious lawyer studied, he got his money's worth in college, he answers it perfect. So in verse 28, Jesus responds, "You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live." And I think it's lost a little bit in translation because Jesus isn't saying like, do this sometimes or do this most of the time. He is indicting the religious leaders of the time saying, you're right, 100%. If you do that every day, every minute of all your interactions, you will have eternal life. But Jesus also knows that that is an impossible threshold to achieve. You can't live under the old law. And what Jesus is pointing out is like, you can't. And think about it. Just stop and think about it for just a second. The folks down the road, they get a new car, they get a pool, they paint their house. And what's the first thing that we do? We want to be like them. We want a new car. We want, the new toys or the new gadget that our neighbor has or our friends have. Right there in that instant, we've broken the law. Think about the times that you lose patience. The neighbor down the road whose dog barks all the time, or, their kids are out late playing, or those folks at work that just grate your teeth. It's an impossible task. So in verse 29, the religious leader responds, and he's trying to justify himself. So he asks Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Because surely, the neighbors, the guy that lives next to me, the guys that I'm friends with, the family that lives across the street, surely it's not the people on the other side of the tracks. Surely it's not, the people that I don't like. My neighbor is, a friend, right? He's the religious leader, the religious lawyer is looking for that wiggle room, that crack that he can, get this on a technicality. And Jesus replies in verse 30, "A man was going down to Jerusalem, it was going from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by the robbers. They stripped him of his clothes and beat him and went away, leaving him half dead." So let me put in context a little bit for you, the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. It was referred to as the blood road. It was about 17 miles long. And in that 17 miles, you descended about 3,000 feet. It wasn't a wide paved road. It was likely a narrow path, ravines and crevices on either side of the road. And at one point, about halfway, I believe, there was a section where there was some large boulders and rocks and the crevices lined up. It was called the Blood Gate because that's where the robbers would have hidden. They'd come out, rob, beat, kill. It wasn't I-86. If you went down this road, you were taking your life in your hands. Next, a priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So here's this man, he's lying on the side of the road, he's beaten, his clothes are torn, he's bloodied, and here comes the priest, and the priest probably is trying to justify himself by saying, "Hey, look, I've been cleansed. I have some responsibilities in the temple. If I touch him, then I'm going to be unclean, and I can't have that because if I'm unclean, I can't do my responsibilities in the temple. And all right, the next person will get him," and he passes along. So in verse 32, it picks up, "So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw the man, he passed on the other side of the road." So a Levite is not a priest, but they serve in the temple. They're kind of the next rung down. And here's this Levite walking around. He sees the guy, same spot. He's still bleeding, near death. And he's like, this is the blood road. I have some responsibilities in Jericho. I can't risk stopping. Because if I stop, maybe they'll rob me, maybe they'll beat me, maybe I'll be late to my next appointment in Jericho. So he passes on. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him, bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. So, back, well before this story, Israel was one kingdom. It was split into two kingdoms. The Assyrians came in, took over the northern kingdom, and Samaritans were the offspring or the children of the Israelites and the Assyrians. They were not looked at as humans. They were, by the Jewish people, considered to be subhuman. There's some religious texts that you can find that will explain that it was better to eat pork than to eat a loaf of bread that was made by a Samaritan. And there was not an Israelite anywhere in the world in these times that would have touched pork. And they would have rather have touched pork, have eaten pork, than taken the bread from a Samaritan. So in this moment, Jesus is indicting the religious establishment, the leaders of the time, saying, you guys are trying to live under the law, but you are missing the grace, the intent of the law. And to really think about what the Samaritan did, I mean, he was on a mission. He wasn't traveling down this road for fun. This wasn't a vacation. He had clearly packed some oil and some wine that they use for antiseptics, for himself if he needed it. And he took that and used it on a man he didn't know. He bandaged him, so he probably took his own clothes and tore them or used clothes that he had carried with him that he would need to bandage this man. Then he takes him, puts him on his donkey, so now he's got to walk, and takes him to an inn and takes care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. So he stays with him overnight. He delays his travel. He cares for him, and then he walks down to the front desk of the hotel and gives the innkeeper 2 denarii. Archaeologists have found a placard from roughly the same time period that said an overnight stay in an inn was roughly 1/32 of 1 denarii. So this guy doesn't know this man, stays overnight with him, and on his way out of the hotel says, here's enough money so that this man can stay here for 64 days. And on top of that, if you incur any additional expense, my next time through, I will pay for it. Like in our culture, we'd feel good about ourselves if we found someone in the same spot, picked them up, took them to the emergency room, and dropped them off. But what happens in this story is he finds him, takes him to the emergency room, pays the hospital to keep him for 64 days, for 2 months, and then says, whatever else he needs, I'll pay for it. I'll pay for any medical procedure that he needs. Or he took him to a hotel, and as he's walking out, he says, here's roughly $8,000 for a 2-month hotel stay. Like, that doesn't even compute in our culture. There is not a single person here today that would even entertain that notion at all. But that's kind of the standard. That is the standard that Christ is laying out here. So then Christ asks, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell in with the hands of the robbers? Christ isn't going to answer this. He's like, I know the answer. I'm going to force you to answer this on your own. And the expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. And then Jesus told him, go and do likewise. He indicted all of them and said, listen, you're trying to live under the law and you have zero chance of achieving eternal life if that is your path to heaven. You've got to pour out grace abundantly. It doesn't matter whether you're a priest or a Levite or a Samaritan. It's a heart thing, not a law thing. You see, for a lot of us, we think that we're good when we put change in the red kettle or, for the Salvation Army at Christmas time, or when we volunteer, at a food bank. And don't get me wrong, those things are good and we need to do those things. But we radically really need to redefine what it means to pour out grace. We have got to figure out how to do it in a manner that doesn't account the cost, that it has no bearing on the cost or has no confines of our time. That is the standard that Jesus laid out. In closing, I'd like to share a story with you about a lady. Her name is Eastman Green, and I believe we have a picture of her. Ms. Green was born in 1959 in Jamaica. She's the oldest of 12 children. By the time she was 20, both of her parents had passed away, and she was responsible for her 11 siblings. Ms. Green went on. She had 6 children of her own, and in the late 90s, she decided to immigrate to New York City in hopes of, finding a better life, get more money, earn more money, so that she could send it home to her kids. She found some odd jobs. She became heavily involved in her church, especially youth ministry. She said that she missed her children and she was eager to get involved, and she organized events and trips for the children in her local church. The money that she earned, she sent as much of it as she could back to her children. At Christmas time, she would send them gifts, and she would save up money and buy a barrel and pack it full of food and send it to her children. But everything wasn't always good for Miss Green. After she came to the United States, she began to suffer from depression and mental illness. There were some times when she would pace her city block, crying out that her soul needed healing, that her soul was killing her. There were times when her roommates, she rented a house with some folks that from the church, and they would come home and they would find all of their belongings out on the street corner, and she just explained that she was trying to cleanse her soul, she was trying to heal her soul, and she would take their stuff out, and people from the church would come back and they'd put it all back together, and they'd get her back on an even keel, and they'd smooth everything out, and everything would be good for a while. And then on the evening of June 15th in 2008, she began to suffer from one of her more severe episodes. And that evening, she found herself banging on her pastor's door, crying that her soul needed healing, that she needed help, and her soul was killing her. And her pastor invites her in, and he sits down and he's praying with her, and he's trying to console her and get her back on an even keel. And he realizes that because of the severity of this episode, he really couldn't help her as much as she needed. So he called 911, and the EMS came, and the police came, and that evening, or early the next morning actually, they took her to King's Hospital in Brooklyn, New York. And I'm going to show you a video that has come to define Miss Green's life. And before I show the video, I have to warn you that the video is not graphic, but it is very disturbing. Miss Green died 24 hours after being taken to the hospital waiting room in a urine-soaked hospital gown, in the very building staffed by the very people with the sole purpose to heal her. No less than 3 hospital employees looked in on her. Countless individuals in that waiting room sat there and watched her wither and struggle and eventually die. Now, I think every single one of us in here today would demand justice for Miss Green. Should those hospital employees be charged with murder? Should those hospital employees be charged with manslaughter because although they didn't really do anything purposely that killed her, they didn't do anything to save her? Should they be charged with neglect? But I want to ask you this question. What if Miss Green had been in a church crying that her soul needed healing and we did nothing? Should we be held accountable for spiritual murder, for manslaughter, for neglect? The sad truth is that at some point in the 13 years that Higher Hope has been here, someone has walked through the doors of our church. Their soul has been under fire. It has been needing healing, and we have done nothing. And that can't be okay. We have got to do something. We have got to have a passion for pouring out grace on the individuals that come through the doors of this church. We can't be okay with somebody spiritually dying in this building. But it goes further than that. There are people in our lives, at the soccer field, in our schools, at our places of work that are spiritually dying. And we have to do something. On the way in this morning, you greeted folks in the lobby. Melissa had you greet the neighbors around you. I guarantee you that someone in here is in that spot, that spiritually they need help. But when you shook their hand, did you give it a second thought? It can't be okay. Are we going to be the priests and the Levites? Or are we going to be the good Samaritans and pour out grace abundantly? Are we going to give of our time and of our resources to those around us? Are we going to lift up our fellow brothers and sisters that are struggling? Because they're here, they're all around us. And it breaks my heart and it breaks the heart of the leadership of this church that there are people in here that need that. And we don't want anyone in here to suffer. We want to be here with you. We want to come alongside you. And we want to help. And the worship team's going to come up and they're going to play a song, and I'm going to have Pastor John over here on this cross, and Rob is going to be over here on this cross. And I know it is a big step. But if you want someone to pray with you, to be there, please come up and meet with them and talk with them. And I'll be here after service, and John and Rob will both be up here after service. But please, don't suffer here. We want to be with you. We want to lift you up. And we want to pour out grace. The same grace that has been poured out on us, we want to share with you.